was about maybe 16 years old the first time I went to the warehouse. It's downtown on the more industrial side of downtown. And so you wouldn't notice. If you didn't know where it was, you'd never know how to find it. There was no signage, no nothing.
As you get closer, you start kind of getting the feel for the music. You hear the kick, the bass drum.
The sound just boom, boom, boom. I mean, emanating from the bricks and everything. And
the sound was something that I never even heard in my life.
They had this big, huge, ridiculous sound system. Big, like 3 or 4 big, huge 7-foot subs, like in this little space that could barely hold 200 people.
A lot of the music that I was playing at the warehouse was a lot of the early Philly stuff, funk and P-funk and lots of R&B and soul.
People say, yeah, I want to hear that house music, like the stuff that Frankie plays and blah, blah, blah.
We called the music that he played at the warehouse house music because they called the warehouse the house.
That's where we would pretty much find out the new music back in those days, was listening to Frankie. There wasn't even like a record store in Chicago that carried it.
It seemed like there was this underground, very deep, central, soulful, black music.
Nobody had an ugly thought. It was a great time.
I didn't know it was a scene. It was just little parties here and there. It wasn't like people had this image they looked at and said, oh, that they house it.
There was only a handful of records. When there wasn't enough records that had a 4/4 beat.
So it wasn't really house music yet.
There was just a need for more.
It needed another step. I was a kid in his grandmother's basement creating just music that for myself that I thought would be cool, and I never in my life could envision that it would grow to be what it is today.
The first person I know in Chicago was Jesse Sanders that made a record.
I wanted to incorporate other things to make new sounds and create different experiences and musical journeys for my listeners as opposed to just playing music.
These things inside my soul, they make me lose control. It goes on and on.
Next thing you know, the whole city's behind it. And that's how the whole birth of house music came along.
The first house records like Jesse Saunders.
One of the first ones I got was probably Jesse Saunders.
Man, I was like baptized into house music.
It was amazing. So from that point on, I was like, man, I have to have this music. So I had to figure out how to get money to start getting a record collection.
Jesse had his label. Trax Records was doing their thing. And then you got all these guys that are producing their own tracks. The only ones that came out major on top back then might have been Steve Silk Hurley with J.M. Silk.
When that happened, I was like so surprised that my record was #1. I was like, what?
They had songs that were crossing over commercially.
In Chicago, most of the scene was a black scene. It wasn't all these different colors and stuff. You might have seen Hispanics and some whites. The underground house, that was just all black, totally black. I didn't even see a mixed scene until I went to London.
The music was all imported. It was Chicago labels, and it was coming in via the specialist import shops. In London, it came mainly through the gay scene, but in the North and Midlands, it looked straight into an already developed scene alongside the existing strands of black music that were being played before eventually, via the hacienda, it went on to become house music all night long. By the end of the 80s, house music in the UK had just become huge.
Came to England July of 1988. I went to the clubs, like I went to hear, I think Paul Oakenfold play. He played Big Fun. And I never seen a crowd reaction like that in my life. Before I know it, the record was, they talking about pop charts, and it's going to the top 40, then it's going in there, and then we're in the top 10. And doing shows like Top of the Pops and stuff like that was definitely not on my agenda.
Wanna dance?
House music culture has gone from growing up as young kids in Chicago to becoming a phenomenon in which I think it's touched pretty much everybody in the world in one way or another.
It's not just a sound. It's not just the music. It's a culture. It's a way of dancing. Just like the track said, it's a spiritual thing, man. It's a cultural, spiritual thing, for real.
Yeah, this is old music, but this is like classic music that will never die, and music that gave you a feeling in your heart.
I come from a party atmosphere and playing for parties, you know what I mean? Where you want people to embrace the music. You're never bigger than the music. The music is always going to be bigger than me and any other guy that's playing.
It's not about drugs. It's not about any of that. It's just about the music and the way it makes you feel.